All right, so far in our digestive tract, we started eating our food. We did the mechanical digestion, started chemical digestion in our mouth, made its way down the esophagus, did a lot of chemical and some mechanical processing in the stomach. Now our Big Mac, our partially digested Big Mac, is making its way into the small intestine. Now the small intestine, and really intestines in general, remember, this is the word that I want you to remember and associate with intestines: absorption. Now, for your food and your nutrients, that absorption, 95% of that material is going to get absorbed in the small intestine. And when we eat carbohydrates and proteins and lipids, understand what we're absorbing and what has been chemically broken down are our polymers into their monomers. Remember that from earlier in the semester? So we've broken down and we're absorbing monosaccharides, amino acids, and fatty acids and glycerols that make up our phospholipids. But also understand that in the very first part of the small intestine, in the bend of the small intestine, it's called the duodenum, we're also going to have enzymes that are injected into that partially digested bolus of material. And so we're still going to have chemical digestion happening. And these enzymes that are added, and you can write this in somewhere if you're on your computer or on your notes, the enzymes are coming from the pancreas. It's important information that didn't happen to make it on that slide. The enzymes are coming from the pancreas. And many of these enzymes are similar to the enzymes we have in our saliva. So what would be the advantage of having enzymes in the beginning, and now we have enzymes toward the end? What's the real advantage of doing it that way? Can you think of anything? Let's kind of back up into the stomach. What's happening in the stomach? What kind of digestion, if we could classify it that way? Chemical digestion. What's the acid that we play with? Hydrochloric acid. That's going to denature proteins. That's going to cause proteins to open up. What other digestion is happening in the stomach? Sometimes we can hear it when it's doing this. Mechanical digestion, grinding the material into smaller and smaller pieces. So what happens is the material leaves the stomach. It passes that sphincter at the bottom of the stomach. Do you remember the name of that sphincter? It starts with a P. The pyloric sphincter. As it passes that and enters in that first part of the small intestine, the acid gets neutralized. We're going to have sodium bicarbonate producing cells that are producing a protective mucus. And we neutralize the acid because we would not want the acid around that would denature the proteins from the pancreas that we need to be active to finish digesting the food. So that first part, that's where this chemical digestion, the neutralizing of the acid, that's happening in the beginning of the small intestine, and the rest of the small intestine is going to absorb all of these monomeric organic molecules that we need for our body. So here's our generic picture. We've made our way down. There's the stomach and the bend of the stomach, kind of underneath the liver and the gallbladder, but it's in that region where we're going to have the pyloric sphincter. And the bulk of what we see in the very center of the field, that's going to be our coiled small intestine with just a little piece of the pancreas sticking right up into the bend of the pylorus region of the stomach in the beginning of the small intestine. So as we define the small intestine, most of what you see with small intestine is the middle part. And that middle part is called the jejunum. That first part that we've been talking about where the enzymes come in and the acid is neutralized, it's only about 10 inches long, and there's that name, the duodenum. And then the last portion of the small intestine that actually connects with the large intestine, this is called the ileum. And at that point where the small intestine connects to the large intestine, we have another sphincter. In this case, they call it a valve, but I want you to realize it's a sphincter. And since we have the ileum as the last part of the small intestine that's connecting to the large intestine, can you think of another name for the large intestine? It starts with a C. You may have heard about it. Colon. So this valve is called the ileocolic valve. That's its big fancy name. It's going to regulate the passage of material from the small intestine to the large intestine. I told you we were going to have quite a few of these sphincters / valves, and that's simply another one. So when we look at the small intestine, again, most of it being jejunum and counting the ileum, we're going to have over 10 feet of small intestine. That's a lot. And what is the advantage of having such a long small intestine? What are we increasing when we have a 10-foot long small intestine? Surface area with which we can absorb all the stuff we ate. And we're going to see on the inside of this 10 feet of intestine and even into the large intestine, the inside's all folded up. And it's increasing the surface area even more. We've made it long, we fold it up, kind of like how the brain is all folded to increase surface area. We've got a lot of area for absorption to happen to get all of that good stuff into our bloodstream. So the folds, and we're going to see them in the next illustration. These folds are called villi. Now here's a little freebie, and I think even the guys might recognize this. When you open up the dryer and you put your clothes in the dryer, you know guys put their clothes in the dryer when they want it to smell better, right? Do you ladies do that? Throw your clothes in with a dryer sheet, even though it's probably still dirty, do you just want it to smell better? And I think guys think if it's warm, it's clean. Don't lie, guys, you've all done that. So when you throw your clothes in the dryer, is the dryer just a smooth barrel? There's these fins, like 3 fins that stick out that help move the clothes around. Inside your intestines, you have these sort of large folds that are that's going to be the first level of increasing surface area. They're called plicae circularis, and it looks like exactly the inside of your dryer. But then the mucosa, do you remember that term from last time? The inside layer, where we have our absorptive cells from the intestine, they are going to be folded on top of those. And those folds of the mucosa are the ones that are called villi. That's plural of villus is singular. So that's the second level of increasing the surface area. We've got a real long tube, that's going to increase it. Then we have these drier folds, plicae circularis. We have these villi on top of that. And within each of these villi, which is going to look like a finger-like projection if you cut it in cross-section, in the middle of those villi, we have a lymphatic capillary. So that all the stuff we're absorbing can go right into the lymphatic circulation, which is eventually going to dump it into our bloodstream, and there we have absorbed the material and we can transport it to anywhere in the body. But we're not done with increasing surface area with just these villi, because every single cell that's on that mucosal surface, the top part of their cell have all these little projections, and they're called microvilli. Microvilli are on the cells. The villi is the fold of the mucosa that the cells sit on. So here's our illustration. So in this case, we're not really illustrating those plicae circularis. But do you see how the inside of the intestine, you see those folds? Those are going to be our villi. There's a villi, there's a villi. So in that middle picture, we see 2 villi right close together. And on those villi, every one of those little white finger-like projections, those are the cells, the absorptive cells. And if we look at those cells a little bit closer, all right, there you can see a single cell. See those little hair-like projections on the surface? Those are the microvilli. So by the time we add up the plicae circularis, the villi, the microvilli, those specializations of the mucosa in the intestines, that increases the surface area for absorption by a factor of about 600. And that's why if you eat material right before you go to sleep and let the parasympathetic nervous system kick in, and again, what's parasympathetic? Rest and digest. It's rest, digest, and absorption. You're going to absorb every bit of nutrients that you ingested because your intestine is geared to do just that. This is an actual histological cross-section through your small intestine. And do you see these villi, these projections sticking out? And all on the surface, you can't see the individual cells, but all the individual cells are directly on the surface of the villi. And do you see that white space in the center of the villi? There's one, there's another, there's one. Those are those lymphatic vessels that are just waiting for that material to be passed from the lumen where we've got our digested material. The cells transport it inside them, and then they transport that material out the bottom into that lymphatic vessel, and that completes absorption of getting it into our bloodstream. This is what it would look like if you had Superman magnification vision, and you could look at, this is a scanning electron microscope, and these are all the villi. They just look like fingers, don't they? All the villi on the surface, on the inside of our small intestine. This is sort of what it looks like from the top. And then coating those entire little projections are going to be all those cells that have the microvilli on the surface. Pretty pictures. Again, this is looking at one of the villi and all of the cells that cover that surface. This makes kind of a little indentation down inside. And again, this is a little freebie because sometimes there are just some fun words to say in biology. In histological terms, and what I teach to my senior pre-med students, is this area that's sort of sunken down between the two villi. They're called intestinal crypts. You know, crypts like in Old England where they bury the people underneath the buildings and everything. This is called the crypts of Lieberkuhn. I guess Dr. Lieberkuhn decided he wanted to stick his name on them, and that's just what it became. I don't know, it's kind of fun. Lieberkuhn. Sounds like he should be a relief pitcher. Lieberkuhn. The illustration on the right here is trying to illustrate in purple that projection that's going right up into the middle. You see you got your blue vein at the bottom, your red artery. I wish they had made them green. Most things are green now, but that purple is your lymphatic system, and that's showing that purple lymphatic capillary that's going up into the center of every one of our intestinal villi so that we can absorb all that material. Now, we're going to go ahead and stick this here. We still have our material in the small intestine. We haven't made it to large intestine yet. But going back to the first part, the duodenum, this is where the pancreas and the gallbladder is going to inject material. The pancreas is going to produce these enzymes, so the pancreas is in fact an accessory gland of the digestive system. And 3 of the enzymes that are going to be injected, there's more than just 3, but these are all we're going to cover. There's a bunch of proteases. Now remember, enzymes are going to end in ASE. And the first part of that word is typically going to tell you what is being broken down. So here we have an ACE, okay? It's an enzyme. Protea, what does that kind of sound like? Protein. And one specific type that is produced in the pancreas is called trypsin. It's a generic protease that's going to digest any peptide bond and release those amino acids. The one at the bottom, lipase. Lip. What do you think that we're breaking down here? Lipids, fats. Now this is going to be the hardest one to remember. Do we have anyone in here named Amy? Invariably, I usually have an Amy in the class, so she doesn't have to be afraid this enzyme's not going to melt her. Amylase is a term for breaking down amylose, which is a carbohydrate. So that's sort of where this term came from. So we're just going to remember that amylase is the enzyme that breaks down our carbohydrates or our sugars. And all that's getting dumped into the duodenum, the first part of the small intestine, to finish off our chemical digestive process as our food is making its way down. Now, in addition to enzymes, the pancreas is also producing and secreting into the duodenum a ton of sodium bicarbonate. Sodium bicarbonate is going to be a pH buffer, and more than anything else, it is going to neutralize all of our hydrochloric acid that just came from the stomach with our digested food as it passed the pyloric sphincter. If we don't have enough sodium bicarbonate and our pH stays too low because of the acid, all of these enzymes will get denatured and we will not chemically digest the material that we ate. So it's difficult to say which is most important. They're all important in the process of chemical digestion. So we've removed a lot of our material. We've removed most of the liver, the large intestine, and most of the small intestine. But as we follow our material down the esophagus, what is our sphincter that's going to be right here between the esophagus and the stomach? Do you remember? It's called LES. It's a good abbreviation. If you see any clinical notes or stuff, you're going to see LES. What do you think LES stands for? You know what the E stands for, right? You know what the S stands for, right? Sphincter. We just got to figure out the L. Where are we if we are right here? Are we at the top? So lower esophageal sphincter. That's going to keep material in the stomach, right? We don't want it to go backwards. We get to the end of the stomach. Now we have another sphincter. We're not going to have a sphincter up here in the upper part of the esophagus. So this is going to be named because of this bottom part of the stomach. It starts with a P. I think you got it last time. Did you get it last time? The pyloric sphincter, the pylorus of the stomach. That's going to release our stomach contents into the small intestine. Here we have the pancreas that sort of looks like a leaf. And the green is going to be the duct that carries the enzymes and the sodium bicarbonate from the pancreas and dumps it into the duodenum to neutralize the acid and to finish the process of chemical digestion. But I want you to notice that what we have coming from the liver going to the gallbladder, and then from the gallbladder going down to also the same duct that enters into the duodenum, we're producing bile. And bile is going to emulsify fats. Write this down somewhere. It might be on the next slide. I can't really remember. Bile emulsifies fats, which means it breaks a large fat glob into little fat globs, which increases the surface area of the lipid droplets so that the lipase enzyme can act on it more rapidly and digest it more quickly. And that's what's coming from the bile. Oh, well, there's our bile right there. So in the previous slide, we saw the liver. We saw the common bile duct and the breaking down of all those droplets. But I think I've mentioned this already for this unit, but absolutely get this somewhere in your notes. Bile is produced in the liver. And what does the gallbladder do? If the liver produces bile, what's the gallbladder for? To store it. Think of it like this. Where is your engine coolant mostly stored in your car? Where does the largest part of the volume of your coolant at any one time, where is it located? In the radiator, right? Man, you should have said it.
I didn't want to say it.
Man, you should have said it. Most of your coolant's in the radiator. But when your engine heats up and the coolant expands, it's not going to be enough room in the radiator to hold it all. Where does the extra coolant go? In that little plastic reservoir, right? And that's the one you usually check to see if you have enough. The gallbladder is your bile reservoir, just like that is in your car. If your liver's producing it as fast as it just goes straight down the duct. But if you're not eating and your liver is producing bile, it starts to back up in the common bile duct, and when it gets to the very top, if you're still producing it, it just overflows into the gallbladder where it's stored. See how that's kind of like that?
If you don't have gallbladder, where is your bile stored?
It's stored in the duct.
Okay.
It's just stored right in the duct. They just snip here and tie that off and remove the little green bag. Now, you're not going to be as capable of digesting fatty meals, because once you use what's in the duct, it's going to take the liver a little bit longer to produce more. So has anyone else lost their gallbladder?
My mom did. She can't
Your mom did? My oldest daughter, youngest daughter, one lost an appendix, one lost a gallbladder. I can't remember which. But the doctors tell you, just take it easy with your diet for a while, learn what you can and can't eat. And fatty meals usually aren't very comfortable if you eat meals rich in fats.
My mom can eat a lot of dairy products.
Dairy affect you? Yeah, because there's a lot of milk fat in some dairy things.
Just depends on the person.
Yeah. Now, the other thing about the liver, not necessarily related to digestion, but the liver is going to be great at storing material. But the liver is also going to be a filter for junk. The liver detoxifies your body. But the storage part of the liver is it's going to store a lot of vitamins, especially fat-soluble vitamins, vitamin A, D, E, and vitamin K. The liver stores a lot of glucose. Again, think back to the first part of the semester. What is the storage form of glucose? Glycogen. And then the liver is going to store some fat. You don't want the liver to store a lot of fat. Then you start to have problems with liver function. But the liver is also going to be that organ that on Thursday night, some of you work overtime, right? Because what is the liver doing for you Thursday night when you're at Whataburger, because nothing else is open, and you're trying to figure out how to get home, right? What? No, I did mean drinking. You drank so much you're at Whataburger and you're not really sure where you are. That's because you put so much alcohol in, the liver can't detoxify the alcohol fast enough. Okay? What is the rule for drinks and being functional? 1 per hour. Okay, now, don't come out with a gallon jug of moonshine and go, hey, that's one drink. No. You know what one drink is. And one drink at a bar is not one drink at somebody's apartment party, right? You've been at the bars, right? You get a drink and it's mostly water because that's cheaper than the alcohol. But at parties, typically it's, you get a triple, quadruple pour. No, that's 4 drinks. That's not one. So don't cheat when it comes to the alcohol. Sorry, officer, I just had 1 drink. Yeah, no, you just blew a 2? Yeah. So give your liver a chance to take care of the alcohol before you operate a motor vehicle or before you try to walk home or whatever else you're going to be brave enough, I start to say crazy enough, but brave enough to do in your condition. And there's our detox. We've already talked about the gallbladder, even though we can see it in this image. Before we get away from liver, and you may know this as well, you know how some lizards, you play with them sometimes as a kid and whatever, and their tail breaks off? That's a protective feature. They can just separate their tail and it'll kind of wiggle for a while. And maybe a predator will go after the tail and be so interested in the tail that the lizard can escape. Well, that doesn't mean that that lizard's going to be tailless for the rest of its life. The lizards can grow the tail back. It can regenerate the tail. And while humans don't have the capacity to regenerate limbs, you can, in fact, grow back your liver. You can lose up to about 2/3 of your liver, and it will all grow back. Now, that's a normal, healthy liver. If you've been drinking for 50 years and you've got cirrhosis of the liver and you've just totally destroyed it, no, it's not coming back because you killed it. But that's another interesting thing about the liver. It is the only organ that can largely regenerate in your body. All right, so the liver made bile, put it in the duodenum. The pancreas had enzymes and the sodium bicarbonate, put it into the duodenum. Now our food is going to make its way through the ileocolic valve, and we're in the colon, or the large intestine. Now the large intestine is going to absorb whatever might remain of our nutrients. Remember, 95% is absorbed by the small intestine, so we're only talking 5%. Not a lot of nutrient absorption is happening. But the colon's primary job is going to be to absorb the remaining water that's in that material. Because we've put in a lot of saliva, which is liquid, a lot of gastric juice that is liquid, a lot of pancreatic juice that is liquid. We drank a lot of water or sweet tea, right? You got to have the sweet tea. So all of that fluid we're going to absorb in our large intestine. But our large intestine, especially as we get toward the end of the large intestine, it's going to store our solid waste until we find an appropriate time to eliminate that solid waste. So just like the small intestine, we have the three regions: duodenum, jejunum, and ileum. Our large intestine is going to have distinct regions. Now, the first we're going to start with, and I want you to think of the junction of the small intestine and the large intestine. Think of it as a T intersection. All right? So the small intestine dead ends into the large intestine, and you can either turn right or left. Or in the case of our body, we can either go up or down. So if our digested Big Mac passes the ileocolic valve and turns left or goes down, it enters in what's called the cecum. The cecum is basically a cul-de-sac or a dead-end street. It's just a little pouch, just a little extension. And the food gets in there, and because of peristalsis, it has to turn around and go back the other way anyhow. But at the end of the cecum, we have this little finger-like projection. It's rather worm-like, and so it gets the term vermiform, which means worm-like. It's the vermiform appendix. That's the one that causes us so much trouble, right? Not that it's really doing a lot of good. I mean, do you notice your appendix behaving right now? Has anyone ever had appendicitis? Did you notice it when it messed up? Was it fun when it messed up? No. It's almost like stumping your big toe. I mean, your little toe. I've broken both of my little toes. I don't even want to tell you how I did it because it's just stupid. I've broken both of them. You don't notice your little toe until it's broke. And then you don't even want to walk. Well, that's the appendix. It's thought possibly it might play a role in the immune system. It's thought possibly it might be left over from some other evolutionary functional role. But for us, it just is in the way and a place to go wrong. And they used to, I don't know if they do it anymore, but if you were having abdominal surgery, most of the time the surgeons, as long as they were in there, they would go ahead and take the appendix out. so it can't mess up. I don't know if they do that anymore. They're typically wanting to leave more stuff in than not. But if our Big Mac goes up, then we're going to be in what's called the ascending colon. All right, so we're going to do a little activity lesson here. So everybody put down your pens and your pencils. Is this a gang sign or something? Does that mean anything? Is that like a surfer hang loose or something like that? Okay, everybody make this symbol. Now, take your thumb, put it in your belly button. Okay? Now, while your thumb is in your belly button, reach your pinky over to the part of your pelvic bone. Okay? You can kind of feel your pelvis. Where your knuckles hit your lower stomach, that's about the point of where you have your appendix. It's called McBurney's point. That's about the point where we're going to have our ileocolic valve and our large intestine and small intestine. We have to turn either up or down. Okay, about that point. If you're having pain right down here, and if somebody pushes on that spot, you want to kick them in the face, you got appendicitis. Okay? Now, our ascending colon does just that. It goes up the right side of our body. And we saw that in the picture, right? It makes this kind of horseshoe, squared off horseshoe shape. Our ascending colon comes up. Then it transports the food across our body. And another word for across is transverse. So we got the transverse colon. So we go from the right side to the left side. Now which direction do we go? We got to go down. The descending colon. So we end up sort of on this opposite side of where our appendix was, right? Now we're over here on the left side. Left lower quadrant is what doctors call that. Well, we're on the left side, and where's our rectum? It's right in the middle, right? So how do we get from the left side to the middle part? We have this S-shaped bend. And because it's S-shaped, it's called sigmoid colon, because it starts with an S. And that S-shaped bend connects with the rectum that's along the center line that is leading to the anus, where we can eliminate our solid waste.
You said our appendix was on the right side?
Appendix is on the right side. Now,
I wonder what they took out. Something got scars on my left side.
really, that's interesting because I almost said this. There is a congenital condition. It's an anomaly. It's not a dangerous one. But there is a condition that is called situs inversus, where all of your internal organs are flipped. You know how your stomach usually curves around on this side? Someone with situs inversus, the stomach curves around over here. And instead of your aorta coming out and going over to the right, your aorta comes out and goes. May or may not be, I don't know. But if you have an appendix on your left and you had that removed on the left, you may have situs inversus. That'd be interesting if you did. Let's cut you open and see. No, I'm kidding. But that's why I tell all of my pre-med students, if someone presents in your ER with lower left quadrant pain, especially if it's a male, don't dismiss it as something else. Check for situs inversus. If a female shows up with left lower quadrant pain, there's another thing it might be. Ovaries. Okay, you might have an ovarian cyst, but you can't dismiss situs inversus and appendicitis either.
For appendicitis, could you just would it necessarily only be here? Could you feel the pain in other places?
The question was, would you only feel the pain in the lower right quadrant? Well, here's the thing, and I'm going to sort of illustrate with heart attack. All right? When you see on the movies or TV or whatever, someone having a heart attack, what is the one thing that they do that you know they're having a heart attack? Do they just grab their chest like this? Their arm, their left arm, they're usually going, oh, my arm hurts. This is called reflected pain. The pain is here, but they're feeling it in the left part of their arm. It's possible for some people, if you have the appendicitis here, it might have reflected the pain to other parts. But most people, that is going to be so sensitive to any sort of palpitation and touching there that they're going to know, okay, let's do an ultrasound, find out, and then go get it. Oh, let me tell you, if you think you got appendicitis, get it out. Because think about it, if your appendix ruptures, what was inside your appendix? Huh? Well, now if you don't have blood flow going to the pancreas and it starts to undergo necrosis or cell death, it can become gangrenous, right? But if your appendix ruptures, what's inside your intestines? Feces, waste. And if your appendix ruptures, guess what just went inside everything inside? Feces, including some of the bacteria that live in your intestines. And that you'll have to get a humongous regimen of antibiotics to try to kill all that bacteria, because you don't really have a lot of blood flow into your abdominal cavity. So it's a long-term mess. I don't mean to be punny, but I mean it's a mess, and it takes a while to treat that. So if you have any inclination you've got appendicitis, get to the ER sooner than later. You don't want to take a chance to get that thing taken out. Okay? So here is our small intestine. They've cut it off, but they show it coming in. Here's our little dead-end street, that little pocket down here, the cecum. There's our little worm, the appendix. But there's ascending, transverse, descending, sigmoid. You kind of see the S shape of the sigmoid and the rectum right in the middle. And then we have these two sphincters. One is smooth muscle, one is skeletal muscle. One you control, the other is involuntarily controlled. And that's going to allow you to eliminate your feces at the appropriate time. Now, we talk about nutrient absorption. So where is this largely happening? Small or large intestine? Small intestine. And the way we absorb things like proteins and carbohydrates, so we're talking about amino acids and our monosaccharides, we are having to use transport proteins in the cell surface of our intestinal absorptive cells, and we're transporting them by active transport. Am I taking you back to Unit 1? Active transport. ATP. Active transport, is that uphill or downhill? Uphill. We're going against the gradient. That's why we have to use that ATP, because we're going to have more glucose outside of those cells, because as soon as it comes in, our cells either use it to make energy or they transport it into the lymphatic system. And so here is our lymphatic capillary. And again, just an illustration of our monosaccharides, our amino acids. Here's that microvilli surface of our intestinal cells. They get transported in. That's the active transport. Then they get transported out at the bottom. And I don't necessarily like this big, large space that we have here. It's probably much closer than that. But that material gets transported out of the bottom of the cell directly into our lymphatic capillary. Boom. We've got it in our bloodstream. Lipids, fats. We break those down into their smallest unit. And these are going to be able to diffuse into the cells. And as they diffuse into the cells are going to process them, and they're going to form triglycerides. How many fatty acid chains in a triglyceride? 3. That's pretty easy, right? But fats, you don't really transport them all that well in the blood. Because if we think about the characteristic of a fat, and back when we were talking about our organic molecules, are fats going to be hydrophilic, or are they going to be hydrophobic? Hydrophobic. Remember, oil and water, what? Don't mix. And what is your blood mostly? Water. So you can't dump a lot of fat into your blood. It's just going to stay all clumped up, clog up, you'll get a clot, in the wrong place, you're dead. So what these cells do in your intestinal tract is they take all these triglycerides and they coat them with protein. They make a big protein ball, and on the inside of that ball, that's where they pack all the triglycerides. So the triglycerides aren't soluble in our plasma, but this ball that's protein on the outside that is hydrophilic, that whole thing is soluble. And that's how it's transported from the intestines to the liver where it can be processed. And that ball that has an inside of triglyceride and the outside of proteins is called chylomicrons. And those chylomicrons, if you ever cut open like a golf ball or a baseball, the outside looks one way, the inside's very different. That's kind of happening here. So the cells throw those chylomicrons into the lymphatic capillary. That gets entered into our bloodstream, goes to the liver, excuse me, where it can be processed. Water is just osmosis. What is that fancy word, osmosis? What is that? Define osmosis. Diffusion of water. That's all osmosis is, the diffusion of water. So here we have our fats. Here's our bile salts, okay, produced by the liver, stored in the gallbladder, entered into the duodenum. That takes that big fat droplet and it breaks it down into smaller little fat droplets. Then we add in our lipases. And where did the lipases come from? What gland did they come from? Pancreas. So the pancreas breaks them down into even smaller little droplets that gets transported into our intestinal cell. They get packaged together into triglycerides, and they're trying to show the three little dots there. The little brown sticks protein, and you see the protein wraps around. That's the chylomicron that gets thrown out of the cell like a golf ball, enters into the lymphatic capillary, poof, goes to the liver. So even though the fats are not soluble in our blood, the chylomicrons, think of them like the fats are disguised to look like a big ball of protein because the water can't see what's on the inside. Okay, do we really have to do this part? We don't like talking about this, right? No, we have to. Weight control. Now, let me just say from the outset, if you can eat anything you want and not gain weight, you are going to be so cursed after you get past 30. You will think, oh, I'm just going to... No, after 30, something just, it's like a curse. I don't know what it is. So start developing healthy eating habits and a healthy lifestyle now, and it will be much easier for you down the road. You might say, if I got to do it then anyway, I'm just going to live large right now, right? Because I'm young, I can burn it off. No. When you get to 30, you go, why didn't I listen to that crazy professor? Man, it'd be so much easier. Develop those healthy lifestyles now. And our focus really, and I don't necessarily agree with this completely, but people count calories. People count calories. And while that is important, it has to be one aspect of your overall health and your nutrition. But understand that this little c calorie, by definition, scientifically, that's the amount of energy or material required to change 1 gram of water by 1 degree Celsius. When you talk about the calories that you see on a back package of something you're going to eat, that's 1,000 of the little c calories. Or sometimes you'll see it written as a kilocalorie. All right? If you want to lose weight, burn more calories than you consume. That's the key. More than what you eat, burning the calories is the key. Now, you might not gain weight, but if you're just eating the junk food, you're not going to be healthy. All right? Now, this is part that I kind of like. I kind of like this, and I'll explain to you in a second. You have what is referred to as a basal metabolic rate. How much energy your body needs to do nothing. And when I say do nothing, right now, what you're doing right now, your heart's beating, your muscles are causing respiration, air moving in and out, you're conscious. You are exercising your basal metabolic rate right now. Anything above that, any athletic activity, walking to your next class, that's above your basal metabolic rate. The thing I like about basal metabolic rate, and the reason that I like doing weight training and increasing my muscle mass, I hate cardio. Anybody else hate cardio? I hate it. It's important to do it, I know, but I hate it. But if you build more muscle, guess what? Your basal metabolic rate goes up because muscles require more energy to maintain. So when I'm lifting weights and I'm really hating it, I just think to myself, yeah, but this is going to allow me to burn more calories by doing nothing. When I sit and watch TV, I'm burning more calories. I like the idea of burning more calories and doing nothing. Maybe it's a guy thing, but it's your basal metabolic rate. Now, if you have a totally sedentary lifestyle, you understand what that means, right? You don't do anything. You're a couch broccoli. You're not even a couch potato. Then your basal metabolic rate is going to be terribly, terribly low, and you can look at a picture of a cake and gain 10 pounds, right? So that basal metabolic rate is very important. How is it influenced? There's your 30, right? Something about 30 years old is like falling off a cliff, and your basal metabolic rate will tank. What is your food intake? Unfortunately, ladies, I know that we're in this era of equality, but unfortunately, males, typically speaking, have a higher metabolic rate than females. Males stereotypically have a higher percent body mass, and that keeps their BMR up. Now, if you want to put me and my BMR up against one of our Lady Jack athletes, I'm not even going to get in that competition, okay? Because their BMR probably kills me, because I'm kind of a couch. I'm a potato. I'm not a broccoli. I'm a couch potato, right? But here's the part that you can do nothing about. Down here at the bottom. Genetics. I have the suckiest genetics in the history of the world. From my dad alone. High cholesterol, he takes medicine for. High blood pressure, he takes medicine for. Sleep apnea. We know sleep apnea. People that stop breathing in the middle of the night and they have to have the breathing machine. Yeah, I've had mine for 12 years. Why? Thanks, Dad. Heart arrhythmia. And guess what he told me a couple of years ago when he called me? He said, I got bad news. I'm like, it better not be anything genetic or I'm trading you in. I'm done with your genes. He said, I just got diagnosed with prostate cancer. I hung up on him. I did. I hung up on him. He called me back laughing because they had caught it early and prostate cancer is very slow. Don't think I was insensitive to my dad. But I'm like, I'm done with you. I'm putting you up for adoption. I don't want your genes. But when you look at your parents and their overall health, especially when it comes to basal metabolic rate, maybe the percent body fat that they have, you can get a pretty good idea what you're facing. Now, it doesn't mean you have to end up like them. It may mean you've got to work harder, eat differently to obtain your goal for your health. Anybody else know they got sucky genetics? I've got great parents, don't get me wrong, but their genes suck big time. So it's just an uphill battle because of those genetics. Now, BMR, basal metabolic rate, don't confuse that with BMI. You probably heard of BMI, right? Body mass index. And this body mass index, if you've ever looked at it, it is horribly unforgiving. Man, the standards they have for BMI, I look at this and I feel like I am morbidly obese. I'm like, what? I would have to be like 100 pounds. You know what? I saw a meme one time. It said, I looked at my BMI and I was mortified. But if I was 8 foot tall, I would be so great. So I guess we need to grow if we can't lose the weight. But BMI is a percentage. It's a ratio of your weight to your height. And it is a very, very tough standard. So being overweight is being 15 to 20% above this BMI. Most of us are going to fall into this category, unfortunately. Even as healthy as we may all feel and seem, because of this BMI thing that is so strict, most of us are going to be right here. And unfortunately for Americans, 30% of Americans are going to be more than overweight, either obese or, oh, that's underweight. Yeah, I don't know if BMI, you're going to have to be sick, I think, if you're going to be underweight with the BMI. But most of us are going to be either overweight or in the obese category. And it's a problem that Americans typically have because we have access to so much food. We have access to so much sugar. Have you ever looked at meals that are served at restaurants in Europe versus meals that are served here in the United States? A lot smaller. My wife and I go out to eat. We only buy one entree. We only buy one entree. She'll nibble, eat a little bit on it. I'll eat as much as I can, and we still ask for a box. There's just so much food. But we're conditioned, right, as kids. What do you have to do to your plate? Clean your plate, right? Not that guys need very much help when it comes to that. Like vacuum cleaners. You put it in front of us, we're going to eat it. And people think, I've got all this food, I'm just going to eat it all. I paid for it, right? No, it's the proportion that lops us into that category. Now, sugar's another big one, right? I think I read a study that sugar stimulated the pleasure center of your brain that was the same as the center that was stimulated by heroin. Is that right? Or was it crack?
It's cocaine.
Cocaine, I'm sorry. There was some very addictive drug, but it stimulates the same center of your brain. Have you ever tried to give up sugar? Y'all are young. You will, after 30, I promise you will. You'll cut your sugar. But if you can give up sugar for a couple of weeks, or maybe drink some diet drink, then go back and drink a regular sweetened, like Coke or something. It tastes like syrup. It's amazing how your taste can change just in a short period of time. And how your body doesn't it's going to crave it for a while, just like trying to give up smoking or something. It's going to crave that sugar. Those Pop-Tarts are going to be calling you. And the thing is, if you have given that up and you have something sweet, that craving comes back all of a sudden. And it's very hard not to continue down that path. But again, balance, that's the big thing. That's the big thing with our nutrition, with anything. You got to have a balanced diet. So balance the carbs with your proteins and your fats. And as I'm learning right now, man, reduce your sodium. Heavens, we get way too much sodium in our food. Sodium is a preservative. It's cheap. But all the sodium you get, you're retaining so much water that affects your blood pressure and your overall health. Let me challenge you to read labels of what you eat for sodium and keep track of how much sodium you're getting in your meals and how much sodium you're getting a day. So here's our unforgiving BMI. And so if you find your weight across the bottom, then you find your height, that's what's going to tell you where you are. And I hate this picture. I hate this picture. I'm glad it doesn't have age on here, but age will affect this too. But I'll just be a little bit transparent. Where am I? Now, your grade doesn't depend on this, but am I overweight? Would you say I'm overweight? Y'all suck ups. Okay, so 6 foot tall, I would be about right here. I am almost, look at that, I'm almost in the obese range. That's why I hate this thing. Who came up with this BMI? Some kinesiology graduate student with 0.1% body fat or something? I mean, this is crazy. But again, and I'm like, who's even going to be down here, really? But this is a goal, a target for you to get an idea, okay, maybe I need to change my lifestyle, maybe I need to start eating better. Do what? Oh, yeah, you're in the gym all the time. It's crazy. All right. So once again, the digestive system doesn't always work properly. Lactose intolerance. Anybody in here? Lactose intolerance? Yeah, it can be a bad thing, especially when there's free ice cream, right? With lactose intolerance, lactose is a principal disaccharide in dairy products. And you have an enzyme that is produced in your stomach that's called lactase that breaks the lactose down into the monosaccharides. If you don't have functioning lactase, that disaccharide can cause a lot of irritation and discomfort in your digestive system. Therefore, lactose intolerance. Now, in your intestines, especially as you get older, in your colon especially, you may have these little pockets that start to branch out into the middle of your intestine. They're called polyps. Now, these polyps are typically non-cancerous, but doctors don't generally like to see a lot of polyps because they can, in some cases, become cancerous. So they'll typically go in and have them removed. That is via this process called colonoscopy. Now, when I was a young man, I wanted to be an astronaut. I wanted to be a payload specialist on the shuttle and the space station and do experiments in space. I got my astronaut application form. I read everything I could about the process. Realized I was not competitive because most of those people are pilots, have 3 PhDs. I'm like, what? But the one thing that really sort of stopped me in my tracks was when they were talking about the health requirements for astronauts and everything they had to do. And in one of my reading of a blog of one of these astronaut candidates, they said, and then it was time for what the astronaut candidate corps refers to as the steel eel. Colonoscopy. I'm like, okay, I'm out. Yeah, I don't have to go into details about this, right? There's only one, there are 2 ways to get to the colon. And a colonoscopy is not through the mouth. So you can just, yeah. Appendicitis, already talked about appendicitis. ITIS means an inflammation of the appendix. Sometimes you can try to treat it with antibiotics. Most of the time they're just going to get it out just to prevent the rupturing of the appendix inside your abdominal cavity. And again, that's a bad day. Hepatitis, not part of our GI tract per se, one of our accessory glands. Hepatitis, there's ITIS, that's going to be a viral inflammation of the liver. And we have 3 different kinds, hepatitis A, B, and C. B and C are transmitted in the blood. We do have vaccines available for type A, type B, and I believe now they have one for C. If I'm not mistaken, I think it's still fairly new. Hepatitis C is a real bad one because much like our AIDS, HIV, it can lay dormant for a long period of time before it becomes really active. But B and C are bloodborne, contact. Hepatitis A, that's going to be contaminated food and water. And this is the one that can spread. Well, all of these can spread fairly quickly. But that's the one because of the food and the water transmission. That's the one that you can get pretty easily. Gallstones. Did somebody have gallstones or just gallbladder issues? You had gallstones. Again, when you look at the bile salts that are present in bile, think about this. When you were in elementary or middle school, did you ever do the experiment where you made the salt or the sugar solution and you put a string in it and let it evaporate so you could grow the crystals on the string? That's what's happening in your gallbladder. It's such concentrated salt solution that you start growing crystals, the gallstones inside the gallbladder. And it's going to prevent the storage of the bile in the gallbladder and the release of the bile. But if some of these stones get down into your bile duct, now you got a big problem. Now the surgery is going to have to be a little bit more complicated to remove the obstruction and remove the gallbladder. Yeah.
What are kidney stones?
Kidney stones, you can have a number of different flavors of kidney stones. A lot of them are going to be protein crystals. But you may also have, I think some are uric acid crystals. It's, again, crystals that are inside the kidney. Unfortunately, with kidney stones, they don't usually stay there. They get into the ureter, the tube that goes from the kidneys to the bladder. And these stones are not marbles. They're jagged. And I'm going to leave it at that. Yeah. So, anorexia and bulimia, are we familiar with these? Both of these are going to be caused largely by psychological issues and an idealized body shape. Anorexia, we just don't eat. And you don't eat and you don't eat. Bulimia is, I love to eat, but I don't want to gain weight, so I'm going to eat and then I'm going to binge and purge. Again, both of these are very dangerous. People have died from taking these to the extremes. So if you have friends that you suspect suffer from either one of these, you may need to have an intervention. You may need to have an encounter with them. It may end your friendship with them, but if it saves their life, is it worth it? Right. But these individuals need counseling and they need help. Looking at some of these pictures is just heartbreaking to see these individuals that have gone to these extremes for what they consider to be beauty. You know, it's just not healthy, not healthy.